Blender 5.2 just moved from its alpha to its beta release, which means we only have some bug fixes to go before the final release. So now we know everything about the new features we are going to get. And in Blender 5.2, especially the Compositor received a lot of updates. So let's go over all of the new features and changes of 5.2 that will affect the Compositor. One of the most exciting features in my opinion is that the interactive or traditional Compositor now supports animation playback. This means we can finally play image sequences and videos in the Compositor and also animate nodes with keyframes while having the ability to preview the outcome. And also, the Compositor will now use the GPU by default instead of the CPU, which gives a huge performance boost without having to set it up manually. Another advantage of the interactive Compositor has always been the Gizmos for certain nodes like the ellipse and box mask. These allow you to transform elements interactively by moving your mouse. And in Blender 5.2, these aren't exclusive to the Compositor's backdrop anymore, but can now be viewed and controlled in Blender's image editor. To make sure this feature works like expected, node gizmos will now also be affected by transform offsets. And on top of that, the node gizmos can now also be animated by using the auto keying feature of Blender, which means keyframes will be created automatically when you use the gizmos. But let's move on to some of the new nodes for the Compositor. For example, the new blank image node allows you to create a color solid in a definable resolution. And this might not sound like much at first, but it's actually a game changer. For starters, you can simply use it as a background for your compositing scenes. And the big advantage of that is that you don't have to worry about clipping. For example, if you would just use the alpha over node to add a backdrop by changing the color of the background input, the result will automatically be clipped to the image input you use as the foreground. But by using the new blank image node, you can avoid this clipping behavior and just transform your foreground image without having to worry about clipping. But there's also another pretty cool use case for the new blank image node, which is creating a kernel for Blender's convolve node. For example, you can use the image coordinates of a low resolution blank image for procedural textures and then use that low resolution texture as a kernel to create something like camera lens blur. Let's move to one of the biggest changes of the Compositor, which is the addition of multiple new input socket types you might already know from geometry nodes like integer vectors, matrices, transforms, and much more. Especially useful is that you're able to add object and camera data to the Compositor. To add them, you can also just drag and drop the objects from the outliner into the Compositor. I will show you an example how you could use them a bit later in this video. But before that, I want to show you a feature that has been anticipated for a long time. I'm talking about the ability to add text elements right within the Compositor. Like, you can just define the font, the text alignment and the wrapping, type in some text, and you have your text element. And this is also where another of the new input sockets comes into play, which is the string input. By using this new input type and the related utility nodes, you can already create a few effects, like this typewriter effect I've created. The only thing missing currently is being able to transform individual text characters, but you could already work around that by just using multiple string to image nodes. And another exciting addition to the Compositor are a few new preset assets for the Compositor, including the long-awaited film grain effect. I will showcase the new node groups, but before that I want to clarify that not all of them are completely new, but a lot of them just became easily accessible for the first time. This is because of the new remote asset libraries of Blender 5.2. Essentially, remote asset libraries are assets that are hosted online, which you can just download and update on demand. And some of these new Compositor assets are part of Blender's default remote asset library. So in case you don't see all of them, you just need to make sure that you've enabled Allow Online Access in Blender's preferences. If you would, however, want to add a third-party remote asset to Blender, you would afterwards have to go into the new Asset Libraries panel in Blender's Preferences and add a new remote library. And then you would simply have to paste the link to the remote asset library in the pop-up and confirm it. If you want to test that feature, you can do so with my own open source compositing pack MPComp, which includes 150 different node groups for Blender's Compositor. This is just a public test link for now and not the link I will use for the final remote release of the pack, but in case you want to test this feature, you can just copy the link to the library from the description. Alternatively, you can also download and install the release version as a local asset library. So let's take a closer look at Blender's new compositor assets. As I've mentioned before, we finally got a node group for film grain. It comes with some presets you can choose from by using the menus to keep the inputs at a minimum. But if you want further control, you can also set everything to custom, which will expand several inputs for you to adjust. Next we have Blender's new Dithering node group, which will reduce the amount of different colors of its input and then use patterns to blend between the limited colors. So basically, you can think of it as a pixel art filter. Again, you can use a menu to choose between different dithering patterns, including multiple bi-dithering patterns, which is usually the most popular pattern for dithering. But we also got a few more complex node groups that utilize the different render passes of Blender to create 3D post-processing effects. For example, the new depth atmosphere, which lets you use a render's mist or depth pass to add fog to your scene. Just keep in mind that the Realtime Compositor of Blender, which works directly in the 3D viewport, only supports using different render passes when using Eevee. If you're using cycles, you would have to render the image once and then use the effect in the interactive compositor. This also applies to the new paint filter. Well, at least when deciding to use its tracking feature. If you disable the tracking feature, you just have a simple 2D paint effect. But when enabling the tracking and using the depth and position render passes, the paint effect will be applied with depth, which makes it easier to keep different objects in your scene apart. Again, you can choose between different presets here, like watercolor and oil paint, and also adjust a paper texture overlay. Another effect, which you can use both in a 2D and a 3D version, is the night vision node group. As the name suggests, it will add this popular green night vision effect to your footage. And by using a render's depth pass, you can also add a depth-based darkening effect, so far away objects are less visible. We also got a few new node groups that already make use of the new inputs and nodes of Blender 5.2. By using these, you can generate texture coordinates from the camera in your 3D viewport, which means you can create a procedural background in the compositor and make it automatically adjust itself to the position and rotation of the camera. This is a pretty cool feature, as it might enable us to create 3D and 2.5D elements in Blender's compositor, which moves it one step closer to the functionality of After Effects. The VSE also got some pretty cool new features to strengthen its integration of the compositor. For starters, the VSE will now use the GPU for compositing, which again gives a huge performance boost. And compositing node groups and assets can now instantly be added as a modifier on a VSE strip. There are just two conditions the compositor assets have to meet. The first input of the node group has to be the image input, and the .blend file of the assets has to be saved in Blender 5.2. So if you have compositor assets that show up in the asset library but not in the VSE modifiers, make sure the first input of the node group is the image input and that you open the .blend file of it in Blender 5.2 and save it once. I also hope Blender itself will update its assets to meet these conditions, as currently the Dithering node group can't be used in the VSE because its first input is the menu to choose the dithering pattern from. For my own compositing pack MP-comp, I've made sure to update all nodes to have the image input at the top for this exact reason in the latest update of it. Just make sure to open and save it once using Blender 5.2 if you use its local asset library release. This new integration of compositing modifiers and the VSE also allows us to easily add transitions to clips. For example, by using one of the transitions from a pack, you just add the modifier to the first clip, place the clip it should transition to below it in the timeline, and then select it as a mask in the Compositor modifier. But speaking of node groups in the Compositor also received a lot of cool smaller updates. Apart from the new input types you can use now, you can also use a default input type now. This basically enables you to create a node group with an input for the animation time, which if the user doesn't connect anything to, will automatically use the scene time. So essentially you can make an input entirely optional now. We also got the warning node in the Compositor now, which you can use to display error messages or warnings in the VSE modifiers if a certain condition is met. And to create even better performing node setups, you can now see the total processing time of the Compositor when enabling the timings overlay right above the group output node. Let's get to some of the smaller but cool new features and changes. For example, when using the grease pencil in Eevee, you now get the correct depth of the grease pencil object in the render's depth pass. Previously, grease pencil objects have just been ignored by it. So again, a feature that increases the 2.5D capabilities of Blender and its Compositor. When using the transform node in Blender's Compositor to scale something down, you can now also set it to use the Anisotropic interpolation, which gives a lot smoother looking result. And last but not least, the stabilize 2D node, which is used to apply tracked stabilization to your footage, now received a frame input. This allows you to alter the timing of the stabilization, which can come in handy when using fast forward or pausing effects for footage in the Compositor, so the stabilization stays in sync. Well, these were all the new features of Blender 5.2 for the Compositor. I sure think it's very exciting. And if you want to see the limits and capabilities of Blender's Compositor, make sure to check out my compositing pack MP-comp, which will also receive a big update. Again, it's free and open source, though support over platforms like Ko-fi is always highly appreciated. That was everything from my end. Make sure to like and hype the video if you want to, and to submarine to my channel. Have a wonderful day. Bye.